What could I have foreseen when the young man who helped me install the cafeteria entered my home and found that he had negligently left my toys and some intimate apparel on the sofa? Moreover, subsequent to that moment, everything would endure a transformation. Solitude enveloped me. Nevertheless, a cordial store employee reassured her that she would not be alone when she made the purchase of the coffee maker that day. Who could have anticipated that a young and inexperienced fellow would enter my life and have such an unexpected impact? I would be delighted to provide you with all of the information. I have been divorced for 15 years and am presently residing in a retirement home. I am 60 years old. Naturally, there were instances in which I was the solitary proprietor of cherished possessions that held personal significance. In fact, I utilized them so frequently that I nearly overlooked their accidental placement in the center of the room. It is possible that it was solely a routine or a method of bridging the gap in adolescence. Nevertheless, the morning in question appeared to be wholly routine. One of my primary goals was to acquire a coffee maker and continue with my day. Nevertheless, the youthful Ethan was the one who transformed the entire situation with his generous offer of help. I was unaware that the day, which had begun as ordinary, was on the cusp of becoming something genuinely extraordinary when I opened the door and greeted him with the box. Ethan, who was 23 years old, emanated an abundance of vitality, enthusiasm, and energy. Upon entering my residence, his eyes scrutinized every square inch of the room, ensuring that the coffee maker was fully charged. Her attention was immediately attracted to an intriguing object: the personal clothing and items that had been negligently abandoned on the sofa. They had become so close that their absence was imperceptible to me. They seemed to be the least noteworthy feature of the residence to me. Upon entering the room, Ethan smiled slyly and inquired, "Is she alone?" His eyes were ignited with a piqued curiosity. I experienced an acute hot flush on my face. I am uncertain about how to respond, as the situation unfolded in such an unexpected and distressing manner. The cafeteria configuration was a simple endeavor. Subsequently, I resolved to safeguard the confidentiality of these personal aspects of my existence. As it was a private matter, I refrained from projecting the repercussions of my illness onto another individual. I stated, "Ethan, we will pretend that you are unaware of this." My voice was slightly trembling. It was as if all of my aspirations had been abruptly shattered into 1,000 fragments. Ethan's eyes fixed on mine, and his lips curved into a smile, responded to my statement. It is clear, however, that these subjects are not readily dismissed. Certainly, they are as attentive to the audience as you are. This only served to exacerbate my apprehension. I progressively averted my gaze and sighed, "Ethan, please remember to subscribe and activate the notifications for additional stories of this nature. You will be unable to suppress the urge to convey your opinions after listening to this piece in its entirety. Please do not hesitate to submit them in the remarks section below. Your contemplations are avidly anticipated." Nevertheless, he persisted in exhibiting his humanity and sincerity. "It is entirely natural to experience these feelings of melancholy," he remarked, his eyes now gleaming with a new luster. "Is it not true that each of us has a distinctive set of aspirations? Nevertheless, do you not believe that there are instances in which these endeavors are merely insufficient?" A discreet emphasis that persisted until the end was echoed by the weight of his words, which he did not explicitly state. It appeared as though she was making an effort to establish a connection with me, extending herself in a manner that was both assertive and gentle. Our gazes briefly intersected. We were subjected to a sudden surge of intensity, a magnetic pull, an unspoken attraction, and a subtle yet profound intensity at that instant. Ethan's warm gaze had a tangible presence that awakened something within me, captivated me. We are drawing closer with each passing second. I was profoundly affected by each syllable that was spoken. I came to the realization that the experience I was having was entirely new at that instant. Ethan observed the coffee when you first arrived to retrieve it, and a peculiar spider danced in his irises. "You have bestowed upon me an emotion that is wholly unique to any other I have experienced." I momentarily paused to organize my thoughts before responding. What terms would you use to describe the emotions you are currently experiencing? There was a colossal ocean of emotions within me. However, it appeared to be nearly impossible to yield to its allure. He replied with a sardonic smile, asserting that I had reciprocated the gesture. Under any other circumstances, young man, I would not have accepted your offer of assistance or welcomed you into my home. I verify this. Nevertheless, I was cognizant of a more profound sensation that was present within me. The rhythm of Ethan's voice, his attitude, and everything else about him remained deeply ingrained in my thoughts, as if they had been affixed to my most sunken-in epidermis. My emotions were becoming more difficult to conceal in my gaze, as they were as alluring as roses. I eventually spoke after a brief period of silence, disclosing that I had worn the shirt and trousers for the duration of the day. They are endeavoring to reduce the pressure that is obstructing my respiration. I will take a moment to change into a more suitable attire in order to unwind. Please feel at peace. For a prolonged period, Ethan's gaze was fixed on me. I made an effort to redirect my attention, albeit for a brief period. However, I was unable to do so. I was captivated by an irresistible impulse as I climbed the stairs, and the distance that had previously separated us narrowed with each passing instant. I was wearing a dress with delicate lace sleeves that encircled my figure. She kindly directed me to the kitchen after applying a subtle touch-up to my makeup. As I descended, my gaze was attracted to Ethan, who was situated in close proximity to the room's entrance. Your gaze was fixated on me, whether intentionally or unintentionally. I was briefly ensnared in a web of doubt, paralyzed as my thoughts danced freely in my mind. I thought, young man, your intentions are quite apparent. I regard you as a fortunate occurrence in my life. We are committed to the future. I contemplated the matter in silence, and I believed that I would not be able to detect his gaze when I approached him. When I addressed Ethan, my tone was tinged with sarcasm. Do you feel disconnected? Do you have a girlfriend? Alternatively, are you exclusively available in the evenings? As I observed it, I experienced a sudden surge of emotion. We were on the cusp of comprehension, and each word, gesture, and gaze held a profound significance. As I observed the emotion and the quiet sorrow that was reflected in her gaze, a smile progressively formed on my lips. After you have completed the installation of the coffee maker, would you like to together prepare a cup of coffee? I spoke without acknowledging the minor tremor that was impairing my balance. We initiate a conversation. Would you be so kind as to share your story with me? As I approached him, I experienced a shudder. Each inconspicuous aspect of him served as an incentive for me to approach him more closely. Ethan's anxiety and trembling caused him to bend over the chair, but he was unable to find solace. Nevertheless, I made a decision and positioned my chair in close proximity to hers. While my skirt was securely fastened beneath me, I was only able to elevate it a few centimeters. Nevertheless, he was acutely aware of this. Ethan's gaze nearly intersected with mine as he elevated his head. His attention was palpable. It was characterized by an air of authenticity. I gazed at him in bewilderment, attempting to quantify this newfound intimidation, and a smile appeared on my lips. I crossed my legs in a casual manner and allowed my arm to rest on the back of my chair. Did you experience anxiety as you anticipated this event? I intend to create a lighthearted and playful ambience for the event by employing a broma. Nevertheless, the tension between us was progressively escalating. Ethan asked, "How many years do you have?" with an anxious tone in his voice. However, his gaze remained unwavering. Her voice trembled faintly in a delicate balance between awe and respect. I was under the impression that you were 15 years old. My eye was drawn to a deer. Did you genuinely believe that I was 30 years old? This was both intriguing and alarming. Suddenly, a smile emerged on my face. What is your disposition toward individuals who are 50 years of age? As I examined him and flung a coin, a juggler's smile danced across my lips. The intensity of the experience compelled us to become more intimate with each word and transient moment we exchanged. He was utterly apprehensive about my presence, as evidenced by the sorrow in his gaze. His voice was slightly tinged with caution as he responded, "No, that was not what I intended to say. Your youthfulness and allure are genuinely captivating. Your words struck a chord with me. I was enveloped in a warm, comforting embrace. Nevertheless, a feeling of unease persisted within me throughout the entire ordeal. I am now so near that the mere thought of taking one more step is excruciating." The conversation was abruptly interrupted, and we were compelled to remain silent. I developed the inquiry by inhaling in order to preserve a sense of tranquility. "Are you currently in a romantic relationship? Are you currently experiencing sentiments of isolation? Therefore, how do you spend your evenings alone?" I was somewhat apprehensive and anxious as I anticipated T's inquiries. Ethan's gaze was firmly fixated on me, and he lowered his voice. He observed, "I am alone." At that time, I was entirely certain that this was the case. He was in a state of isolation, but he was hesitant to recognize the severity of the situation. We briefly exchanged glances, and I could discern that he was cognizant of the intensity in my gaze. I experienced a subtle transformation while anticipating, and I came to the realization that it was time to act. My emotions began to solidify swiftly, and I realized that it was time to act. "That is not the outcome that will occur this evening," I declared, adopting a more resolute and authoritative demeanor. My attention was redirected to him, and each word I spoke was of great consequence. At that moment, I came to the realization that everything was on the cusp of a transformation. I addressed Ethan with a more inviting and compassionate tone than my typical one, uttering the word "come." I immediately focused on the bedroom, where the bed was situated, and without hesitation, I turned. He did, in fact, enter. He noticed that his footfall were following me, which caused him to slightly accelerate his breathing. At the dormitory's entrance, Ethan was apprehended. His expression was fervent and filled with anticipation, despite the slight tenseness of his musculature. I returned to confront him and noticed that his expression was a blend of exhilaration and apprehension. "Ethan, are you sufficiently prepared?" Inquire with a voice that is both measured and unwavering. I approached him with a gentle smile while we were conversing. "My expertise is readily apparent. Take a deep breath. There is no reason to be concerned." I gingerly placed my hand on his shoulder as I approached. Despite the fact that the gentle touch seemed to assuage some of his anxiety, it also elicited a sudden rush of excitement. At that time, the vibrant spirit of Ethan was in opposition to the security and clarity that had been developed over time. I removed the sleeveless section of my dress from my shoulders with unrestrained abandon. The screen detached from my body prior to my descent to the earth. Ethan's gaze was fixed on me, and the atmosphere was tinged with a combination of melancholy, intrigue, and desire. Despite a brief emotional respite, I was able to maintain my composure. As the silence enveloped us, I approached him slowly, as if he were establishing a close connection. I held my breath as my fingertips gently grasped her wrist, anticipating her next move with anxiety. Ethan ultimately directed his attention to me after a brief period of reflection. Her gaze was defined by a palpable sense of enthusiasm and determination. His hand gently rested on my shoulder, and as he bent forward, our lips finally met in a gentle embrace. The audacity of youth, tempered with a touch of ingenuity, was exemplified by his kiss. However, that same innocence only served to allure me further. I gradually retreat, directing my steps toward the bed. With a deliberate and halted grace, I was permitted to descend upon her. The exhilaration that enveloped me was further heightened by the sensation of cold against my skin, which traveled up my spinal column. Observed Ethan. He remained in his position, enveloped in a network of uncertainty regarding his future movements. "Ethan," I addressed him in a manner that was both gentle and inviting. I concentrated on the empty space to my left, wiping the tips of my fingertips on the bed's surface. "Do not be alarmed. There is no cause for concern." Ethan approached me with deliberate steps and eventually seated down next to me. As if we were suspended in time, the atmosphere appeared to dissipate with each passing moment. My hand relaxed gently on his shoulder as I turned to him with a gentle voice and inquired, "Have you ever considered this moment? Ethan, is it feasible for you to observe it?" Ethan maintained a steadfast and unwavering gaze upon me. He murmured in a low, slightly trembling voice, and, rather than envisioning it, he never believed it could actually occur. "I am deeply appreciative of your consideration of the narrative that has been shared. It would be highly appreciated if you could send me a me gusta and subscribe, as it will serve as a motivator for me to produce my next video." All uncertainty was resolved during that period. We were not only connected to our physical bodies, but also to the extent of our emotions. I was cognizant of a truth, despite the fact that neither of us had any idea where this path would lead. I had been anticipating the emotional responses that I would experience with Ethan for an extended period. As I sat by his side, the emotion within me was transformed into a Valentine oil. I sat on the edge of the bed, gazing at Ethan, and gradually rose. I gingerly inclined myself toward him from the head of the bed, capturing the blend of anticipation and awe that danced in his eyes as my gaze intersected with his. I addressed Ethan in a manner that was both gentle and firm. "We are not isolated this evening. Rather, we are united." Although Ethan was endeavoring to emerge victorious, his gaze remained fixated. His silence conveyed a profound comprehension of the significance of my own words. Their eyes were filled with a renewed value, despite the fact that their hands were clawing at the edge of the bed with a ferocious intensity. I approached him with a deliberate lack of urgency, gingerly grasping his fingertips with my hands. I whisper, placing my lips against yours, "We will treasure this moment this evening." Abstains from posing any inquiries and cherishes the absence of anxiety. Ethan maintained his composure, refusing to regress for even a moment, despite the rapidity of his respiration. For a limited period, we seek refuge from our loneliness, seeking solace in the warmth of another's presence. Ethan's respiration was brisk. It seemed as though his eyes were striving to capture every aspect of the moment, as if he intended to preserve it in his memory for all time. I briefly paused before raising my hands to my abdomen, conjuring a combination of uncertainty and value. An enthusiastic sneezing ensued subsequent to the initial vacuuming. Nevertheless, I was able to sense the profound moment that was erupting within me, despite my inability to control my respiration. My hands will delicately trace the contours of Ethan's face as I bow to him. It is exhilarating and exudes a sense of grandeur. Ethan maintained his gaze, responding with a voice that resonated profoundly and trembled with a scalding heat. "I comprehend your sentiment. However, does it not appear that the events are unfolding at an extraordinary pace? This emotion is both delicate and potent. It is probable that it will be evident that I am embarking on an unfamiliar journey with this." I smiled as my lips curled. I approached him, gingerly placing my lips against his forehead in a gentle kiss. "Ethan, there are instances in which life transpires in a more beautiful manner when we cease to overanalyze." Ethan briefly hesitated before progressively removing his hands from my neck and edging closer to me as our enemies regrouped and our distance between us decreased. I remarked in a soothing tone, "Embrace the moment and let it flow." The trajectory of our lives could have been irrevocably altered by this moment. In specific instances, Ethan was permitted to be entirely unencumbered due to his jade status and willingness to surrender. The sensation was truly extraordinary, and it continued without interruption, as had been foreseen. He appeared to be in a state of complete gratification as I sat by his side later, as if he had finally released all the burdens of his tension. Ethan's firm yet tender embrace captivated me, attracting me to him. I closely observed the consistent rhythm of his pulse as my head rested on his chest. The music's rhythm was both enthralling and soothing. The contours of his body delicately displaced my digits without my awareness. Ethan's voice was only audible when he exhaled deeply. "Margaret, I have never before encountered such tranquility and serenity." Her voice was distinguished by a captivating combination of sincerity and sympathy. He was smiling, but I abstained from gazing at him, keeping my head tucked against his chest. "Is this the case?" I will be considerate. He persisted, firmly positioning one of his hands on my chest, drawing me in closer. I have been in pursuit of an elusive object throughout my existence. I never foresaw that I would ever dedicate the time to savor a moment of this nature. However, at this time it is all worthwhile. Your words evoked a warm embrace from within, enveloping me in a comforting embrace. He responded, Ethan, the mere act of being in your presence awakens emotions that have been dormant for an extended period, as I relaxed in harmony with the steady cadence of his breathing. Exceptional. Ethan's lips were adorned with a teasing smile, and his hands were immersed in my hair. He remarked, his thoughts fractured, I am of the opinion that we have both provided each other with precisely what we required. I promptly arose to locate her gaze. The sincerity and sense of liberation that were evident in their gaze were the means by which everything was transmitted. He subsequently recommended that we preserve the existing condition. It is essential that we fully embrace this moment. We exchanged a silent statement as Ethan sat slowly. We remained in that embrace, each arm around the other, allowing the moment's transience to ensnare us. The tranquil atmosphere and mild radiance that emanated from the exterior seemed to have been specifically designed for our presence. I allowed myself to be enshrouded in the tranquility of the moment, gradually closing my eyes as the serenity enveloped me, my head swaying against Ethan's shoulder. A thought quietly entered my consciousness at that moment. The idea of inviting him to stay with me, of transforming this home, these quiet moments, and these lonely evenings into something lively with his company, began to cross my mind. Its vitality and wealth were enhanced by the perspective of integrating it into my existence, which illuminated everything. She was, of course, unaware of the path that lay before us, the profound connections, the exciting days, and the opportunities that lied ahead. Nevertheless, I maintained a sense of assurance in my consciousness.